Tonight, the world watching for a possible Russian invasion of Ukraine as diplomatic efforts continue to stall. New video showing Russian troops practicing urban combat operations in Belarus. The Belarusian border, just 50 miles from the Ukrainian capital of Kyiv. The U.S. now moving its embassy from that city, saying Russia could invade with little to no warning. Ukraine's president blasting that decision, but now calling for a day of unity on Wednesday, which he says could be the day Putin attacks. Also tonight, the plane crashing off the coast of North Carolina while carrying a group of teenagers and their parents. The urgent search for any survivors and what we've learned about the plane's movements right before it disappeared. Plus, the horrific killing in New York City. A woman followed by a stranger and then stabbed to death inside her apartment. Police say it's the suspect's 8th arrest in less than a year. The growing calls tonight to end a surge of violence in the city, including a number of attacks on the Asian American community. Palin's lawsuit dismissed. A federal judge tossing out Sarah Palin's claim she was defamed by the New York Times, saying the former Alaska governor's legal team did not prove actual malice. So why is a jury still expected to issue a verdict? In-flight emergency, the man arrested after allegedly trying to open a plane door during a flight from D.C. to Los Angeles. A crew member using a coffee pot to try and stop him. One of the other passengers on board joins Top Story tonight the moment they thought the plane was going to go down. And long-lost brothers, the siblings who did not know each other existed, connecting after 50 years thanks to a local news report. Top Story starts right now. And good evening from Los Angeles tonight. We begin Top Story with the warning Russia could launch an invasion of Ukraine as early as this week, despite continued diplomatic efforts from the U.S. and its allies. The U.S. now closing its embassy in Kyiv and relocating a small number of diplomats to a city in western Ukraine. Over the weekend, President Biden speaking to the leaders of both Russia and Ukraine, telling Putin he would face, quote, severe costs if there was an invasion. However, Russia continues its show of force at Ukraine's borders, including carrying out what appears to be urban warfare drills in Belarus. Ukraine's president calling for a day of unity this Wednesday over reports Russia could begin an invasion in less than 48 hours. Putin continues to deny plans of an attack and signaled today he could be open to more talks, but some residents in Ukraine are still preparing for a war. NBC's chief foreign correspondent Richard Engel is there and leads us off tonight.
With diplomacy going nowhere, this is not a good sign. Russian troops in Belarus practicing urban combat. U.S. officials say this week is critical, declaring Russia is now able to attack with little or no warning. So the U.S. is now moving its embassy personnel out of the capital to western Ukraine, a move criticized by Ukraine's President Zelensky, suggesting it showed weakness. And tonight, Zelensky was dismissive of U.S. intelligence that Russia could soon invade, which he says causes panic. They tell us February 16th will be the day of the attack. We will make this a day of unity, he said. His aides later said he was referring to recent media reports. Meanwhile, Ukraine's ambassador to the UK is walking back comments that Ukraine might forego its bid to join NATO, a key Russian demand. This weekend, President Biden spoke with President Putin. No breakthroughs. Today, Russia's foreign minister met the Russian president at the end of yet another long table, telling him there's still room for diplomacy. Putin, in a tight COVID bubble, has met leaders at what seems like social distance plus. Russia says it won't invade, but in Ukraine, some families are getting ready for war. Training to handle an AK-47 is Valentina Konstantinovskaya, a 79-year-old retired accountant and a great-grandmother.
Do you think you're going to actually be doing this?
Yes, if Putin will come, I should be able to shoot, she says.
The Kremlin says it's still open to diplomacy and has a 10-page document ready to discuss. U.S. officials say they, too, are still open to diplomacy. But officials tell me they're confident some Russian military action is coming.
Richard Engel leading us off tonight here on Top Story. Richard, thank you. With the threat of a possible invasion looming, the White House says it's keeping the door open for diplomacy as Russia sends thousands of additional troops to the border of Ukraine. Kelly O'Donnell joins us now from the White House. Kelly, lots of news to get to, so let's start with Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin. He's traveling to the region this week. Walk our viewers through where he's headed and what's his goal.
When you think, Tom, of the timing and the locations, it is really critical. The defense secretary is heading to NATO headquarters in Brussels. He'll also be visiting Poland and Lithuania. Part of what he'll be doing is trying to reinforce to NATO allies and partners that the U.S. will keep its commitments, will try to fortify the defenses in Europe and be a presence there at a time when things are obviously incredibly tense. When you think about the timing, to have someone as high profile as the defense secretary on the continent at a time when there could be a ground war if Russia acts, that is very notable. And so to have his presence there and his message is critical. Also, the vice president is scheduled to go to Munich for a security conference. So to have both of them there representing the United States at a time when these alliances are so key sends a big message. It may also buy some time as the U.S. and its partners are trying to forestall any action from Russia, while the White House says more aggression from Russia could happen at any time.
Speaking of buying time, we saw there in Richard's story, Russian President Vladimir Putin having a public discussion with his foreign minister and essentially leaving the door open to more diplomacy. At least that's what they said. How does the White House interpret today's comments from Moscow?
Well, one of the things they keep looking at are the actions of the Kremlin. Words can be very important in diplomacy, but actions often speak much louder. And so what they're saying is they're looking at satellite imagery and other intelligence, some of which they don't talk about publicly. But they will say there are more than 100,000 troops from Russia that have moved into locations all around the border of Ukraine, and they are in very aggressive postures. And that says to the United States and its partners that that is a very worrying sign. And so Russia can talk about wanting diplomacy, and the President Biden, and other foreign leaders are saying they want that off-ramp and want to keep that door open, but they're looking for tangible signs that Russia is willing to de-escalate. And so far, they aren't seeing that. Tom?
All right, Kelly O'Donnell for us at the White House tonight. For more insight and analysis on the escalating tension in Ukraine, I want to bring in NBC News political analyst Ben Rhodes. He's a former deputy national security advisor for the Obama administration. Ben, in Richard Engel's report, he highlighted something that Zelensky put out on Facebook today, saying that if the invasion happened on February 16th, it would be a day of unity. Some aides, there's been some reporting that he was possibly joking about this. If he really was joking, if that reporting is correct, what does that tell you about his mindset as he faces down Vladimir Putin?
Well, a couple of things. I mean, first of all, he was a comedian before he was a politician, so not totally impossible that he might bring humor into it in some fashion. I think what it reflects more acutely, though, right, is there's been some tension around the fact that the United States has put out all of this information about an imminent Russian attack, about the potential time frame for that attack. You've heard Zelensky expressing some frustration because obviously that can sow panic in the Ukrainian public, that can hurt the Ukrainian economy. Frankly, I think that the Biden team is doing it for good reason. They want to get ahead of Russia having a false pretext. So it may be that in citing this February 16 date, part of what he's alluding to is the fact that the United States has been the one that's been putting out these dates. That Ukraine is basically sitting there saying, hey, look, we've been in a low-grade conflict with Russia for 7 years now. We live constantly with the threat of invasion. But if it's February 16th, we'll be ready. So I don't take it as a negative about his capacity to deal with the crisis. I do think it speaks to the amount of pressure he's under and some of the added pressure that he's felt from not necessarily always being the one who's been out there foreshadowing when this might happen, because the Biden team is the one doing that.
Do you see, is there any way this ends without an invasion, but Ukraine still seeking a NATO membership?
I think that's a very good question, and it's very hard for me to see that. No. The U.S. tried to kind of redirect Putin's interest in a dialogue about European security to other, frankly, more tactical matters like transparency around military exercises, around missile deployments. Putin is focused on the big strategic issue of whether or not NATO continues to expand and whether or not Ukraine, which is obviously a huge border state to Russia, is a part of NATO. And absent that fundamental concession of Ukrainian neutrality, it's hard for me to see Putin not doing something militarily. Just to give people like a bit of the history here, Ukraine had indicated that it wanted this NATO membership after 2008 when they were granted what's called the NATO Membership Action Plan by NATO. After Russia invaded Georgia in 2008, which was also another country that had been offered a membership action plan bordering Russia, it was only when a Ukrainian president, 2010, publicly committed to not pursue NATO membership and to neutrality that Putin kind of backed off a bit. And then once that president was ousted in 2014, that's when Putin annexed Crimea. And so long as there has been a Ukrainian president committed to NATO membership, we've seen this degree of provocation and aggression from Putin.
All right, Ben Rhodes for us tonight here on Top Story. We'll have more on Ukraine later in the broadcast, but we want to turn now to a big headline here at home. A small plane going down off the coast of North Carolina. 8 people, including children, reportedly on board. Officials announcing just moments ago at least one passenger has been found dead. As the search continues tonight for any survivors, Morgan Chesky has the latest.
Tonight, first responders converging near the Outer Banks of North Carolina after a weekend flight took a tragic turn. Officials say a private plane with 8 people on board went down over the water late Sunday near the small town of Atlantic. The plane, a single-engine Pilatus PC-12. Family members of those on board say its owner was flying a group of kids and parents for a special one-day duck hunt. Among those, friends Cole McInnes, Daley Shepard, Jake Taylor, and Noah Styron.
We have no indication that anyone survived the crash.
Photos capture the group celebrating a fun weekend before leaving for the trip back home. The flight's return path last seen on radar by an air traffic controller at Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point, who shared the aircraft was seen behaving erratically, then disappeared from the radar screen. The Coast Guard immediately launched rescue crews both on the water and in the air. Tonight, this message from the high school, now missing 4 of its own. Prayers for our students and the families of these individuals. We will get through this together.
All right, incredibly sad. Morgan Chesky joins us now from Dallas. Morgan, you mentioned the Coast Guard searching for the missing by land and sea tonight. What more can you tell us about some of the things they have found?
Yeah, Tom, in addition to recovering pieces of that very plane, the Coast Guard did confirm today that they have found one of those 8 people who were on board. However, they're not sharing their identity at this time. Officials stress that this search still very much ongoing until they recover those remaining 7 others. Tom?
All right, Morgan Chesky on that breaking news tonight. Morgan, thank you. We want to turn now to the horrific attack in New York City. A woman living in Chinatown found stabbed to death in her apartment. Tonight, community members speaking out against anti-Asian violence and their concerns for their own safety throughout the city. Isa Gutierrez reports tonight from Chinatown.
Tonight, a community in shock.
What happened to her was so brutal.
After police say this man brutally murdered a 35-year-old woman, following her into her apartment and stabbing her to death. NBC News has obtained this video showing the man who was arrested moments before the alleged brutal attack. The victim's name was Christina Lee.
I didn't kill nobody.
Mayor Eric Adams saying in a statement, quote, "We won't let this violence go unchecked."
Enough is enough!
City officials rallying against Asian American hate with the community Monday across the street from Lee's apartment. The NYPD not stating whether it's investigating Lee's death as a hate crime. The incident comes as crime in New York City has increased by nearly 40% in January compared to last year, according to the NYPD. Lee's landlord told NBC New York Lee had just returned home from a Saturday night out when Nash allegedly followed her into the building and up 6 flights of stairs to her apartment.
Mercilessly stalked her.
Police arrived at Lee's apartment around 4:30 Sunday morning, where they say they found her and the suspect barricaded in the unit. EMS was able to enter eventually. Then officers found Lee in the bathroom with trauma about her body. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The suspect, identified by police as 25-year-old Asamad Nash, is facing murder and burglary charges. Nash already had 5 prior felonies and multiple open court cases. Lee's company posting a photo of her on Twitter, saying, "Our hearts are broken," and that Lee was always dedicated to making beautiful and inclusive artwork. Crimes against Asians and Asian Americans specifically have risen exponentially during the pandemic in New York City. Police reporting that incidents targeting them rose by 361% in 2021.
It's like someone that could honestly be our friend, you know, someone that I'm sure we probably would have maybe ran into or connected with.
The first reaction is a lot of fear and anxiety.
Today is a joyful day, it's Valentine's Day, but today I feel very sad because this tragedy happened right here.
It's been a really hard time for Asian Americans and New Yorkers. It's hard always being on your guard, but that's what we need to do.
All right, Issa Gutierrez joins us now from Chinatown in New York, right in front of that apartment where Lee was killed. You know, Issa, there seems to be two problems here, right? One, that portion of your piece where you mentioned that Asian Americans are becoming the victims of so much violence lately, ever since this pandemic really took off. And then two, you have a suspect who has a very long rap sheet who for some reason was out. So I know you spoke to a lot of people there from the community. What else did they tell you about protecting themselves?
Absolutely, Tom. I spoke with many of Lee's neighbors as well as other members of the Asian and Asian American community from around New York City, and they all said the same thing to me. This tragedy puts them more on edge than ever. They're still mourning the death of Michelle Go, the 40-year-old who was fatally shoved in front of a New York City subway car just 1 month ago tomorrow. They're taking self-defense classes. They're volunteering for organizations that help people get from place to place safely. Why? Because they are so scared that something like this could happen to them or to someone they love. Tom.
Issa Gutierrez with the ongoing crime problems there in New York City. We do want to stay in New York now because there's been an outcome in Sarah Palin's defamation case against the New York Times, but it might not be the one you expect. There's no verdict from the jury yet. Instead, the judge throwing out the case. NBC's Dasha Burns has more.
We'll be back tomorrow. Tonight, a judge dismissing Sarah Palin's defamation lawsuit against the New York Times, saying the former Alaska governor failed to meet the burden of proving the paper acted with actual malice. Judge Jed Rakoff saying, quote, "The Supreme Court made that balance and set a very high standard, and I don't think that standard has been realized by the plaintiff with respect to at least one aspect of the actual malice requirement. The jury will still render a verdict, but it will not override the judge's decision." Palin responding outside the court.
This is a jury trial, and we always thank jurors. We always appreciate the system. So whatever happened in there kind of usurps the system that I believe we're used to and we respect and works.
What did just happen in this case?
The judge determined legally that the plaintiff didn't bring enough evidence to trial, but the jury doesn't know about this, and they continued to deliberate so that they could still return a verdict. Palin loses either way at the trial court. If the jury comes back in her favor, she loses. If the jury comes back in the Times' favor, Palin loses again.
Palin sued the Times in 2017, accusing the paper of damaging her reputation as a political commentator, with an opinion piece about heated political rhetoric after Republican Representative Steve Scalise was injured in a shooting. The editorial erroneously implying a link between Palin's Political Action Committee and the 2011 shooting that injured Representative Gabby Giffords and killed 6 others. It said the PAC circulated a map of candidates in stylized crosshairs. But the Times issued a correction 2 days later, saying it, quote, incorrectly stated that a link existed and that it had incorrectly described the map.
The plaintiff had to prove here that the Times was deliberately indifferent, that they recklessly disregarded, that they put their fingers in their ears and said, la, 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 I can't hear you, to the truth. And the judge here said there wasn't enough evidence of that.
The case seen as a test of the longstanding protections for press in the U.S. Judge Rakoff saying he expects an appeal will be inevitable.
What comes next here?
This is really about what happens on appeal. And there are some thorny appeal issues here that are hard to navigate. But the bottom line is this. Palin's case just got a lot harder to win on appeal, too.
All right, Dasha Burns joins us now from our top story studios there in New York. So, Dasha, this is a little strange. We heard there from Sarah Palin in your story. She's clearly upset. She wanted a jury to decide the verdict. The judge has tossed the case. So why will the jury still issue a verdict?
Yeah, Tom, the timing of this ruling is pretty surprising. It's unusual for a judge to dismiss a case while the jury is still deliberating. Now, the jury still has yet to reach a verdict, but Tom, when they do, it's not going to be moot, actually, just because a case was dismissed. This decision will be appealed, and as Danny just said in the piece there, this is all about what happens on appeal. Instead of ordering a new trial and starting the process all over again, the appeals court will now already have a jury's verdict, and they may actually choose to use that when this does, as many expect, go to appeal, Tom.
All right, Dasha Burns for us tonight. Dasha, thank you. Next, a New York couple is accused of taking part in a $4.5 billion plot to launder stolen Bitcoin, making their first appearance in court today in Washington, D.C. The Department of Justice explaining how they trace billions the couple is accused of trying to hide. Here's Jacob Ward with more.
And y'all gotta let your cars. A day after celebrities like LeBron James and Larry David appeared in cryptocurrency commercials during the Super Bowl, you gotta call your own shots. This New York duo, dubbed the crypto couple, appeared in court, charged with laundering billions in Bitcoin. 34-year-old Ilya Lichtenstein and 31-year-old Heather Morgan are tech entrepreneurs. Lichtenstein, who describes himself online as an occasional magician, is the founder of a digital wallet company designed to stop fraud and terrorism. Morgan, who once wrote that strong personal branding is essential as a founder, dispensed advice on TikTok.
I'm going to tell you my secret for making dreams a reality.
Wrote about how to avoid cybercrime, and even rapped under the name Razzlecon.
Come real far, but don't know where I'm headed.
But all that time, according to the DOJ, the couple had the proceeds of a 2016 crypto theft of nearly 120,000 bitcoins, worth millions when they were stolen. Over the years, the couple allegedly moved the money around, trying to hide its origins. But unique passwords for the funds were stored online, where the authorities eventually found them.
Today, the value of that Bitcoin has grown to over $4.5 billion.
The DOJ seized $3.6 billion of it, the largest grab in department history. Bitcoin, like all cryptocurrency, relies on a blockchain, a public record of transactions which allowed authorities to trace the money. The couple could face 25 years in prison, but their personal brand will continue to grow. Netflix announced Friday it's ordering a documentary series about the couple. Meanwhile, the DOJ says it will auction off the seized billions. Jake Ward, NBC News.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoking new emergency powers to break up the trucker protest that shut down part of the U.S. northern border. This comes as demonstrations inspired by this group have already started to pop up overseas. So will it happen here in the U.S.? NBC News national correspondent Gabe Gutierrez has more.
So-called freedom convoys protesting COVID restrictions have been bubbling for weeks. But now police in Western Canada have arrested 11 people and seized guns, body armor, and a large quantity of ammunition at a border blockade. Late today, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau invoked rarely used emergency powers.
These blockades are illegal, and if you're still participating, the time to go home is now.
Over the weekend, the Ambassador Bridge connecting Detroit and Windsor reopened after protesters had blocked it, clogging the supply chain for U.S. automakers. But similar demonstrations have started popping up around the world, from New Zealand to France to Israel. In the U.S., they're being embraced by some conservative politicians.
But I hope the truckers do come to America. I hope they clog up cities.
But disinformation is flourishing. Facebook officials tell NBC News that some of the groups that have promoted American trucker convoys are being run by fake accounts tied to content mills in Vietnam, Bangladesh, and Romania. Extremist researchers are also warning that many anti-vaccine and conspiracy-driven communities in the U.S. are quickly pivoting to promote disruptive convoys.
These groups are using these trucker convoys specifically to push their anti-vaccine messages. It sort of worked in Canada, and they're going to see if it can work in the United States.
All right, with that, Gabe joins us now from our top story studio in New York. Gabe, I want to pick up on that last point there. So the big question is, will these convoys happen in the U.S.? I understand you have some new reporting.
Yeah, that's right, Tom. As you know, U.S. federal authorities had been monitoring the possibility that a convoy could disrupt the Super Bowl there in Los Angeles. That obviously did not happen. But now online groups are discussing another potential date for road closures in the coming weeks, and that's March 5th. Tom?
All right, Gabe Gutierrez for us. Gabe, we thank you. the stabbing spree. Nearly a dozen people stabbed at multiple locations in Albuquerque. What we're learning about the suspect now in custody. Plus, the raging fire at a gas warehouse overseas. Take a look at this. Multiple explosions reported. The evacuation's underway. We'll tell you more. And the man arrested after allegedly trying to open a plane door mid-air. One of the passengers on that flight spoke to Top Story tonight how others on board subdued the man until the plane made an emergency landing. Top Story just getting started on this Monday night. All right, back now with some tense and actually really scary moments in the air this weekend. An American Airlines flight from D.C. to L.A. diverted to Kansas City after a passenger tried to open an exit hatch. Crew members and even other passengers battling to subdue him. It's just the latest in a string of outrageous incidents on planes throughout this pandemic. Priscilla Thompson has more.
Tonight, an arrest on board an American Airlines flight.
Yeah, he's trying to get into the cockpit for American 1775.
After a passenger allegedly tried to open an emergency exit, according to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Missouri.
Okay, we got 4 passengers now trying to detain this gentleman, American 1775.
Passengers on board now describing the harrowing moments that led to the emergency landing and arrest. What went through your mind as you're watching all of this unfold?
I honestly thought I was going to die.
Muaz Mustafa was on board that flight from Los Angeles to Washington, D.C. About 2 hours into the flight, he says he noticed a commotion at the front of the plane.
A flight attendant came. He looked visibly scared, worried, as a flight attendant is just sort of yelling for the lights to be turned on, and the plane starts descending rapidly.
The flight, normally a straight shot from LA to DC, diverted to Kansas City instead, as crew members and passengers worked to subdue the disorderly passenger. At one point, a flight attendant hitting the passenger over the head with a coffee pot, according to authorities.
There's blood, like, at the front, like, splattered around, like the flight attendant had blood stains on his white shirt.
American Airlines praising the crew for jumping into action, writing in a statement, "We're grateful to our crew members who are consistently dedicated to the safety and care of our customers and who handled the circumstances with the utmost skill and professionalism." The incident, one of many this weekend, involving unruly passengers. A Honolulu-bound flight returned to Phoenix due to a passenger disruption. And before Sunday's big game, longtime running back Adrian Peterson was arrested on a domestic violence charge at a LAX after an incident with his wife on board a flight to Houston, according to the NFL.
Peterson was released from jail, but he will have to go before a judge this summer.
A spokesperson for the Petersons telling NBC News the incident is a private misunderstanding. These incidents, the latest in a spike of disruptive or violent incidents on board planes that began last year. In 2021, the Federal Aviation Administration logged nearly 6,000 unruly passenger reports, most involving mask wearing. Did you ever think that you would be caught in the middle of something like this?
No, I didn't. It's scary, and you're on this little metal cylinder in the air, and one person on there could become a real problem. At the same time, it was comforting to see like heroic people, other Americans, passengers that kind of got up and worked with the crew to help, neutralize the bad situation.
Yeah, great. Those passengers stepped up because that can be such a scary situation. Priscilla Thompson joins us now from 30 Rock Live tonight. So, Priscilla, what more do we know about this suspect, and has he already been charged?
Yeah, Tom, 50-year-old Juan Rimberto Rivas has been charged with assaulting and intimidating a flight attendant. According to the U.S. Attorney's Office in Missouri, he's currently in federal custody awaiting a detention hearing. Tom?
Okay, glad they were able to land that plane. Priscilla, thank you. All right, back now with Top Stories newsfeed, and we start with some developing news: an arrest in a stabbing spree in New Mexico. Police in Albuquerque say 42-year-old Tobias Gutierrez stabbed 11 people at 7 different locations across the city on Sunday. He allegedly carried out the attacks with a large knife and while riding a BMX-style bike. The stabbings do appear to be random. All the victims, though, are expected to survive. That's good news. All right, the U.S. has suspended all avocado imports from Mexico after a U.S. health official was threatened while inspecting a plant there. Drug cartel turf battles have recently led to the extortion of avocado growers in the country. No word yet on how long the suspension will last, but it came on the eve of the Super Bowl, the biggest sales day of the year for Mexican avocado growers. All right, and Super Bowl champions, the L.A. Rams, will get their victory parade on Wednesday. The parade is expected to begin at the Shrine Auditorium and end at the L.A. Memorial Coliseum. A rally will then be held outside. The iconic Hollywood sign, this is pretty cool, is also being temporarily changed to read Rams House after the team beat the Bengals 23-20 to take home the Lombardi Trophy. All right, we do want to return now to Ukraine and civilians there on edge as hundreds of thousands of troops surround the country, really on all sides. The nation now confronting a new enemy inside their borders, disinformation. NBC's Aaron McLaughlin has a story for us from the ground in Ukraine.
Outside the U.S. Embassy in Kyiv, what seems like an anti-American protest, with hundreds of retirees holding signs declaring the United States the enemy. But take a closer look.
This is very clearly an anti-American protest, but the people holding the sign don't speak English and say they don't know what it says.
Retiree Alexei Solomko claims someone asked him to hold this sign, but won't say who.
I'm for America, not against. It helps Ukraine. I came here pro-America.
But you're holding an anti-American sign.
Well, I don't know what's written there. Now you've told me, and now I know.
Screen grabs obtained by NBC News suggest protesters were paid, offering the equivalent of $7. While NBC News cannot verify the screen grabs, and they surface at a time in which no one can be sure who is telling the truth, a Ukrainian intelligence source says the protest was first shared on websites with known links to Russian intelligence. Ukrainian experts call it part of what they describe as Russia's extended campaign of disinformation, cyber attacks, and bomb threats on metro stations, even elementary schools. Allegations NBC News has not been able to confirm what's known as hybrid warfare, designed to destabilize from within.
The main enemy for the Kremlin and the main enemy they want to show their domestic audience is the United States, not Ukraine.
The Kremlin did not get back to us, but has denied similar allegations. Meanwhile, Ukrainian intelligence says an unprecedented disinformation campaign is ongoing tonight.
All right, that was Aaron McLaughlin there reporting from Ukraine. Now to top stories, Global Watch and the deadly explosion in the south of France. Authorities say the blast started in a commercial building, but then flames spread to nearby apartments. At least 7 people were killed, including 2 children. Crews are still searching the debris for any victims or survivors. The cause is still under investigation. And in Chile, a fire at a gas warehouse prompted hundreds of evacuations. This video is wild. The cell phone video shows the fire and several explosions erupting outside of a residential building. More than 1,500 residents forced to evacuate. Roads in the area shut down. Local media reporting 3 people were inside the factory when that fire began, but they were not injured. Coming up, Bitcoin at the big game. Cryptocurrency companies filling up a lot of the Super Bowl commercial time, including one that just featured a QR code for the entire ad. So what's behind the crypto marketing blitz? Stay with us. And we are back now with Money Talks, what consumers and investors need to know from the business world and beyond. If you watched the Super Bowl last night, then you saw a lot of commercials centered around cryptocurrency. Companies like Coinbase and FTX and Crypto.com looking to gain new buyers and help give Bitcoin the boost it needs after a disappointing January. Bitcoin bouncing back this month, trading at approximately $42,000 after dipping as low as $33,000 a few weeks ago. I want to bring in CNBC technology reporter Kate Rooney, who covers all things crypto for CNBC and for Top Story at times. Kate, first, welcome back to Top Story. You know, I want to ask you about all those crypto commercials we saw yesterday during the Super Bowl last night. Coinbase was one that really stood out. For their entire 30-second ad, they had a QR code bouncing around the screen. Their website ended up crashing.
Yeah, absolutely, Tom. Well, good to see you. Thanks so much for having me. I, for one, stood up for that QR code and was not surprised to see that it was Coinbase based on the amount of crypto spending we've seen when it comes to advertising. But despite the action during the Super Bowl, there's been a lot of buzz around crypto. Bitcoin hasn't really been attracting a ton of new buyers in the past few months, and analysts see this as a big roadblock to any sustained rally, or bull market as it's often called. And so Bitcoin's price has recovered a little bit since January. That was a tough month. Analysts, though, for now, don't think that there's enough new interest to support a longer-term rebound. So that's really what Coinbase and some of the other crypto platforms were trying to solve with those Super Bowl ads. They're looking to bring in new users. I did just get some data from Sensor Tower in the last couple of hours showing that Coinbase is now number 2 in terms of downloads in the App Store. For some context, it was ranked at 186 just a couple of days ago. So it did work in the near term. But the things that really tend to bring people in organically and keep them around our Bitcoin prices. So people want to get in when the price is going up and when it's moving around. I spoke to an analyst, Tom Lee of Fundstrat, who's closely followed on Wall Street and in the crypto community. He said, yeah, you know, those Super Bowl ads might be a boost in terms of user numbers for the exchanges. Crypto prices, though, if those stay flat, people might not, A, be as eager to trade, or B, tell their friends to sign up and trade. So there's a risk that, yeah, they'll get on the platform, but they could lose money and then could eventually be spooked off by some of the volatility. So he's not as convinced that this is a long-term sustainable ad in terms of the amount of people moving into the market just based on some of the buzz around the Super Bowl.
So, Kate, you know, crypto clearly is having a moment. We saw that with the Super Bowl ads. I was sort of taken back. I was walking through downtown Los Angeles, and the Staples Center is now crypto.com arena, which just kind of surprised me. It just kind of showed me the power of crypto, at least right now with the valuations. But there's a survey out by an investment management company, and it found that 68% of investment executives don't think their clients should get into crypto right now. Their top concerns seem to be related to transparency issues and regulation. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's definitely a factor. I think there's a lot of people that are still skeptical about the asset class. It is relatively new. CNBC actually did a survey on this last year looking at some of the barriers to entry. Age actually tends to be the biggest factor in terms of perception of risk and risk appetite. So roughly half of all U.S. investors, based on that survey, said that crypto is high risk, but there were some big differences in opinion depending on age. So about a third of those 18 to 34, so the younger side of the investment spectrum there, say that it's risky. And you look at those over age 64, they're much more skeptical. About 2/3 described it as a high-risk investment. Transparency might be a big concern there. And some would actually argue that Bitcoin is more transparent because it's traceable. So the jury's out in terms of, you know, who, if that actually is the case. Law enforcement have actually been able to trace Bitcoin transactions and would argue that in some cases it's actually more traceable and secure than cash. But we talked about some of the lack of new buyers. The older group is actually the one that a lot of crypto analysts and Wall Street analysts are looking to as that potential cohort of new buyers. The older generation right now controls the majority of wealth in this country. So in terms of where they're going to spend their money, if they get more comfortable with crypto, they could actually be the ones to really move the markets. On regulation, though, you asked about that, Tom. That is still a big risk. It's still an unknown. The industry has been calling for a lot more clarity. They're spending a lot in D.C. when it comes to lobbying. So the expectation is that we may see some more action and some more attention out of Congress. And the consensus view right now is that the U.S. probably won't ban Bitcoin, at least. It's right now a $2 trillion industry. If you look at cryptocurrencies altogether, you know, the ad spending is one indicator of that. But I think we will get a little bit more clarity, and that's what I'm hearing in terms of the industry looking for that. And that could be seen as a good thing. I think when it's more regulated, people think of it as safer, and that could be one of the catalysts just for mainstream adoption.
All right, Kate Rooney for us, explaining all things crypto, which sometimes can be confusing. Kate, great to have you on tonight. Coming up, the long-lost brothers. A man watching a local news report discovering a brother he did not know he had. How the two made the connection and the moment they met after more than 5 decades. Finally tonight, two brothers separated for nearly 5 decades finally reunited thanks to a local news report on our Sacramento affiliate, KCRA. Jesse Kirsch has a story.
When Randy Waits turned on his local news last December, he got a lot more than the weather.
We usually go to Europe, and we said, you know what, instead of a 14-hour flight, we'll do the 1-hour flight.
This man's name and face flashing across Northern California TVs for just seconds during our affiliate's newscast. But tuning into KCRA, Randy Waits saw more than enough.
I've seen him on the news, and I've never met anybody else that had the same spelling of my last name.
Soon Randy's daughter was on the case, too, tracking down Eddie Waits of Southern California.
I saw his features, and he actually looked a lot like my dad in the eyes. So I did my research, and I just searched up his name and looked up all I could.
Turns out this Waits family wasn't the only one seeing a resemblance.
And once I seen the picture of him, I seen my dad. I seen our dad.
That's right. Eddie Waits and Randy Waits are brothers, as KCRA reports, adding the pair was separated at a young age for more than 50 years, never knowing each other existed until February 5th, when they embraced for the first time.
Oh, man. Oh, man.
Where you been all my life?
I don't know. Where have you been?
Yeah, right.
The reunion just in time for Uncle Ed to help celebrate his nephew's 13th birthday.
It's crazy. I didn't even know that could happen.
Thanks to Curiosity, a made for and by TV moment, bringing family together.
Welcome.
Thank you, buddy.
Jesse Kirsch, NBC News.
And we want to thank our affiliate again, KCRA, for their help with that report. And we thank you for watching Top Story tonight on this Monday. We'll see you back in New York tomorrow. Have a great night.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.